Welcome to Rethinking Communication. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore how we better connect with each other through the power of our words. For most of us, formal education left gaps in our ability to communicate well with each other, especially when trying to navigate conflict, inspire change, and overcome misunderstandings. I'm a former journalist, a speaking coach, and a communication expert, and my goal is to encourage you to rethink what it means to be an effective communicator, from the stage to the meeting room to the living room and everywhere in between. I first became a marketing director in my mid-20s. It's been a while now. It's crazy to say that. But at the company that I worked at the time, I started out as a project manager. This was after I had been a journalist. I had gotten out of the journalism world. I moved into that company as a project manager, and then I eventually jumped over to the sales and marketing side where I was a sales engineer, then a director of sales strategy. And then eventually when our director of marketing left, our vice president of sales and marketing asked me to take over that role. And a quick aside here, that vice president of sales and marketing, he was actually my former college roommate, so we knew each other well. But I had some reservations about it. I said, look, I don't know that this is really for me. I've never been in marketing before. And he said, listen, the team doesn't need a marketing expert. They know how to do marketing. What they need is somebody to lead them, to guide them, to set them on the right strategy and path. And you can always learn marketing as you go. That's the easier part of this. So despite my initial reservations about taking the role, I jumped at it. I said, yeah, I can do that. I can be a leader of teams. And in fact, I'd done that really all my career, all my life, dating back to student council in grade school and being class valedictorian. And anyway, I don't need to get into that. The point is, I jumped at the opportunity to be a leader of a team. And it was actually the largest team that I'd ever led. And we had incredible success, but I still always had this little bit of doubt in my mind, in the back of my mind. I think most people these days would call it imposter syndrome. Call it whatever you want. I had this little doubt in my mind of, can I do this well? And so that showed up in a lot of ways, not with my team, not with the marketing team, but in my interactions with my colleagues, the other directors at the company, and the senior leadership at the company, including the CEO. And I remember distinctly one of the first conversations that I had with the CEO at the time, after I had taken the director of marketing role. I was in his office. It was right around the corner from mine. And he and I were just chatting about marketing, and he was giving me his view on it and asking me questions on what I planned to do. And mind you, I'm in a place where I'm still trying to figure out what marketing is. I'm leading the team, but trying to figure out what exactly we're doing. And in the middle of that conversation, the CEO looks at me and says, well, you shouldn't do anything in marketing that can't be measured. He even went so far as to describe, listen, if somebody calls us and says they want to do business with us or they want to purchase our software, we've got to know where they came from. That has to be tracked. And I agree with that to a point. You always want to ask the question, well, how did you hear about us? This is not a marketing podcast, by the way. I don't need to get into good marketing. But there are aspects of marketing that 20 years into my marketing career now, I don't believe that to be true. And actually, when my CEO told me that at the time, I actually didn't agree with that perspective. I chalked it up at the time to just kind of being a newbie to marketing, but something never sat right with me in that belief that everything had to be measured, that all marketing had to be tied to some sort of metric or measurement. And I get it. You want to understand where you're spending your dollars and what's most effective. Again, totally understand. And we can argue that point till the ends of the earth. But I had this belief in me that there are certain aspects of marketing that A, can't be measured, and B, why would you? Great marketing sometimes is off the cuff. It's authentic. It's just on the fly, making a fool of yourself to, let's be honest, bring attention to yourself, to your company, and to the product or service that you sell. And there's an immeasurable quality about some of that work. But rather than say anything, rather than disagree with my CEO at the time, I just nodded my head as if I did agree with him. I just said, and I even remember saying something to the effect of, yeah, I agree with that. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure we measure everything that we do in marketing. Said something like that. I didn't agree. Deep down, I didn't agree. But here's the CEO telling me his thoughts. And here I am saying, yeah, sure. Now, like I said, in the nearly 20 years that I've been leading marketing teams and been as an executive at startups and at large private equity backed enterprises, I found that situation that I was in is a nearly universal experience for new leaders. I was in a new leadership position. I'd been a leader before, but I was in a new leadership position where there was some uncertainty there. And here's how it tends to go. And here's how it went for me. The first step, you crush it in your individual contributor role and you get promoted. I had worked my way up, project manager, sales engineer, director of sales strategy, where I was only leading one other person. And now all of a sudden I'm leading the largest team that I've ever led as the director of marketing. And oh yeah, I've never done marketing before. But here I am. I crushed it in those roles. I got promoted. Now, step 2, I'm given a team to lead. I'm given an executive team that I now directly report to. I have a whole bunch of meetings placed on my calendar where I'm expected to contribute and give my perspective and help set strategy, not just within my department, but for the entire company. And then the third step is I'm given 0 training on how to communicate effectively in that role. Like my boss, the vice president of sales and marketing, he was absolutely correct. You can learn marketing, and I did. And it served me well. And I love marketing. It's been a great career to get into. But so much of how to communicate in that role, how to communicate in that director seat, or eventually when I became a vice president of marketing down the road, or a senior director of marketing as I am now, the communication lessons are all on the job learning. You learn how to communicate up the chain to your executives. You learn how to communicate across departments where you're no longer just focused on your role, but now you're a larger piece of this director level and above team that is, like I said, setting strategy, setting direction for the entirety of the company, and how you communicate across those departments to where it's no longer just about your team and your silo. That so often is on the job learning. And so many new leaders absolutely struggle with this communicative reality. I certainly did. I absolutely did. When faced with the questions that any new leader who does not get communication training, when faced with the questions that they always and consistently will forever face, how do I effectively set expectations and provide guidance for this team that I now manage? In a lot of instances, people are promoted into leadership roles where they come from an individual contributor role on that team. They crushed it, they got promoted, and now the team that was once their peers, their colleagues, are now the people that report directly to them. How do I set expectations and and close that communicative gap and provide guidance there as now their manager? How do I share a compelling vision and clearly and concisely outline the needs of my department, the needs of my people and my team for the people that I report to? How do I disagree with my leadership in ways that don't feel dangerous to me, my job security, my team's ability to do its job? That's the situation I got into with that CEO. I disagreed with his notion that everything in marketing should be measured, and yet I did not have the language and the communicative ability to disagree with him in a way, or at least challenge that perspective in a way that did not feel like I'm sticking my neck on the line here. And so, in the absence of any leadership development program that teaches new leaders how to communicate well, you, perhaps, we are left to drift aimlessly in this learn on the job environment. And that stunts a leader's growth. When you can't set expectations and provide guidance for your team, how are they supposed to know what to do? How are they supposed to move forward in a way that feels in lockstep with the company's goals and strategy? If you can't share a vision with your colleagues across departments, your counterparts on another team, now that you are not charged with just not just your department, but the betterment of the entire company. And of course, that reporting up to leadership. How in the world can you be seen if you cannot communicate your vision, ideas, strategy, thoughts, challenges in a way that makes you stand out? So what so often happens is leaders learn this on the job. It takes years and years and years to do this. And in the meantime, the people that can communicate well or have perhaps learned it at a faster pace or in a quicker environment, they're the ones that get promoted. Or the company brings outside people in for promotions because they have just more experience than you. And this is where many new leaders, especially those that I work with, often express frustration, maybe even anger, right after they begin their roles, because they begin to get these feelings of falling into two distinct traps. That my positional authority gives me decision-making autonomy. So they tie good leadership, good management into simply, I have the role, I have the title. And that can be frustrating when that doesn't always fall in line with that thinking. Good leadership is not always just telling people what to do. In fact, it's most often not just telling people what to do. But then believing that they also, another trap here is believing they have to speak the most and the loudest to be respected, to get that promotion, to have that communicative voice on the team. So that it's this weird, warped world of frustration that my authority alone, my position alone, does not give me the ability to affect change and to drive decisions. And also that I'm feeling this pull, because that's not the case, that I just need to speak the loudest and the most often to be heard and respected. And both of those are false dualities, false choices. They're not true. But no one has ever taught most of them, most new leaders, myself included, that the most powerful way that you can show up as a leader is to be the one to invite curiosity and dialogue into the room. This is what is missing from leadership development programs. I'm speaking to HR people right now. I'm speaking to people who you promote somebody from an individual contributor role into a leadership role, and you never give them the support and the backbone and the coaching and the resources to get better communicatively. That's it. That being a positional authority is not a good leader, is not by de facto a good leader, I should say. The best ones, like I just said, are the ones that invite curiosity and dialogue into the room and drive that. Let me give you an example of this. On a recent coaching call with a client, this particular client told me about a meeting late last year in 2025 in which he was leading a discussion with his team. His senior leadership team was also in the room on their 2026 goals. His role as the team lead was to present to his colleagues, his peers, and his leadership above him on his goals. My client, he's a mid-level director. He told me in that meeting that as it went along, he sensed that especially the executive team, the leadership team above him on the hierarchy, didn't view his priorities as being as important as he believed that they were. So he begins to get this internal narrative that started to whisper to him, I don't think they understand. Well, if they don't understand, maybe I should just push harder. Maybe I should push more. I need to repeat myself because to me, this is so simple. Why don't they understand this? Maybe if I raise my voice a little bit and speak over them, speak a little louder, they might understand. They might get it now. Then fast forward to another call with that same client, a little bit more recent call. He was again expressing some feelings of frustration and anger, his words, by the way, at decisions that were made that went against his recommendations. So at this point, I'm seeing a pattern. We're establishing a pattern here, and I'm seeing the things that I've talked about up to this point. No one's ever brought him along to understand what good leadership looks like from a communication standpoint. How do you communicatively get past the feelings that he was feeling? So I asked him to pause and consider a different perspective. And I told him, a major piece of communicative presence, of leadership presence, of the ability to communicate like a leader is understanding what we can control and what we cannot control. Going back to positional authority, that does not always give you the free pass to leadership. When you're walking into situations where you don't have the authority to make the final decision, as he did, then releasing yourself of the outcome can help you show up more communicatively confident when you know all you're there to do is influence. If you let go of the things that you cannot control, what are you left with? You're left with the ability to influence the room, not control the room. That is a nuance of communication, of leadership communication, that is not taught. You have to learn that over the course of a career, and that can take years in some instances. Like I said, two of the top communication mistakes that I see new leaders make, whether they're new to a leadership role entirely or they're stepping into a new role in a new company, it's trying to control what they cannot control and speaking too much. Like what I said, positional authority, they believe that it gives them decision-making autonomy, speaking too much. I've seen too many leaders try to use more words, as is the case in my client, as a way to just try to guarantee an outcome they desire or as a way to prove themselves. And there's this underlying belief that comes in this place. Like I said earlier, that positional authority comes with decision-making autonomy. And it can be true, but leadership at any level still requires getting others to support your ideas through methods other than sheer force. And just because you have a title doesn't mean people will trust you. So these unknowns, they often translate into believing that in every circumstance, with every issue, with every challenge, and in every meeting, the leader must speak enough to prove to everyone else that their way is the best way, and that can lead to rambling and constantly repeating the same points over and over again. That's what was happening with my client. That's what was happening with me all those years ago. In my effort to prove myself as a marketing leader for the first time ever, I alluded to this earlier, that's how I began to show up. I became the loudest voice in the room. I became so much of I leaned so much on my positional authority that I became a steamroller. I recognize this of myself, but this is literally feedback that I got from my peers. That if Michael doesn't get his way, or it appears Michael's not going to get his way, he's just going to steamroll through the decision. And everybody else gets flattened in the meantime. That's what happens when we're not taught how to show up communicatively most effective as a leader. When we're not taught how to invite the curiosity and the dialogue into that space. My client, he'd created a story in his head that if he just shared more of what he knew, if he just talked a little bit longer, if he just repeated himself one more time to make sure everyone heard him, he'd be more convincing and he'd show everyone that he knew what he was talking about. I sensed that in him because that literally was me almost 2 decades ago. And so when I told my client to release himself of the outcome in those meetings, he went silent for a little bit. And then he kind of softly said, I hadn't thought of it that way. Now go back to my CEO telling me that everything should be measured in marketing. In the same way, um, if my pull, if how I thought I could show up and challenge my CEO in that moment would have been to just be, well, maybe I can talk him out of it. Maybe I can just repeat myself and what I believe a few more times. Maybe I can convince him that how he's seeing it is wrong. I don't have that control. I don't have that positional authority. I don't have that autonomy, but I didn't know any other way. So what did I do? I agreed with him, even when I disagreed internally. So here's the key. Here's what's not taught. A leader opens up space for dialogue. No matter your position, no matter your place in the hierarchy or rank, effective leadership communication often goes against what typically comes to mind when you imagine what great communication looks and sounds like. The cliche is that great communicators are loud, they're fiery, they're long-winded wordsmiths who can turn a phrase or orate as if they're behind a pulpit rather than seated at a conference room table, or in my case, across the desk from your boss, the CEO. But the far more common reality is that the best leaders that I've seen, that I've witnessed, that I've interviewed, they use their words as a way to get others to engage in dialogue. They absolutely have ideas and a point of view to share. My client did. I did. But they know that unvoiced emotions often underlie pushback. The best leaders do. So they invite these feelings into the open by asking questions that uncover the most important details. They're observers. The best communicative leaders are readers of emotion and what is not being said. And they offer up space for dialogue to come forward no matter the setting. I told my client that when he senses pushback against his ideas and recommendations, set aside that need to be right, to control the outcome and the decision, and instead invite those who disagree with you to share more. Call it out into the open. If I go back to me, I could have said, that's really interesting. Everything? Tell me more about that. Can you share more about what you're experiencing? Huh, that's interesting. I don't know that I fully agree there, but I want to hear more about what you're believing here. Really, everything in marketing. Can you think of a time where you might not be able to measure something in marketing? Is that still worth doing? How do you respond to marketing? What's been your experience? Yeah, call it out in the open. When you're the one to invite dialogue into the room, even when you know disagreement could be the outcome, you build influence. When you're saying, I actually don't agree with you here, but I want to have a conversation here because I want to sort this out and figure this out, and let's co-create this together and collaborate on this together, you start to build influence in that space. And through influence, you shine a light on your leadership capabilities. That leads to more outcomes going your way. That leads to more people seeing you as their guide. And that shortens the window of time to get promoted, to move up, or whatever career goals that you have. Because leadership position is not is not just a position to hold, an authority to wield. It's about guiding through effective communication. That's it. And that is what is not being taught. That is what is not a part of most leadership and development programs that I see out there. And that is what I want to help you with. That is what I help my clients with. And so if you're in a position where you're feeling how my client felt, you're feeling how I felt all those years ago, and you want to understand and learn how to get better, you want to make this part of your communicative growth, your leadership growth path? Let's talk. If nothing else, I've actually got a guide out there on my website. I'll link it in the show notes here. I teach leaders to communicate in ways they were never taught. They were never taught in school. They're never taught in a leadership development program. And so I've got a guide out there called the New Leaders Communication Playbook. It's a great place to start. If you don't want direct coaching from me, it's a great place to start. But you can download the link. You can download the playbook at the link in the show notes. And while you're there, reach out to me, either on the page or on the contact form on my website, and let me know, like, what's the greatest leadership lesson that you've learned at work? Heck, email me, michael@rethinkingcommunication.com. What's a situation that you've been in where you learned a leadership lesson? And if you want to talk about what it might be like to work with me as a coach, or heck, even bring me into your company as a trainer and run some workshops on leadership communication development, let me know. Because I never want what happened to me, that experience to me all those years ago with my CEO, or the situation that I described with my client. I never want that to happen to you or to anybody else you know. And so if I can help there, I'd love to be a part of that growth path and journey for you. I hope this was helpful. I hope this maybe opened some eyes and maybe got you thinking about, gosh, how have I adopted my communicative approach as a leader at work? And listen, by the way, this is a whole other episode perhaps. This is not just at work. This is in every relationship, in every situation. What it means to influence and lead and guide others, that just doesn't only happen at work. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it got you thinking about areas of growth, perhaps for you, your team, your company, your organization. And if it did, and you want to learn more, I'd love to chat with you. Jump over to my website, michaelashford.com, and let's connect. Download that guide. The link is in the show notes. And until next time, until the next episode of Rethinking Communication, keep asking questions.